August 1st, 1944, Normandy, France. Sergeant Stanley Kowalski crouched behind a hedgerow, watching German positions across a wheat field. The 32-year-old from Chicago's South Side had been fighting in Europe for 2 months since D-Day, and his company commander had noticed something distinctive about him and other Polish-American soldiers in the unit. They fought with an intensity that exceeded even the aggressive standards of American infantry. They volunteered for dangerous patrols. They pressed attacks when other soldiers sought cover. They showed no mercy to German prisoners and had to be restrained from committing acts that would violate rules of warfare. The company commander realized something deeper was driving their fury. Kowalski and men like him had family in Poland, a nation that had been erased from the map in 1939, divided between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, its people subjected to systematic extermination, enslavement, and cultural destruction. Polish Americans knew what the Nazis had done to their ancestral homeland. They knew about the massacres, the concentration camps, the destruction of Warsaw. They knew that aunts, uncles, cousins, and sometimes parents or siblings were suffering under occupation or had already been murdered. This knowledge gave their combat a personal dimension that soldiers fighting for abstract principles could not match. They were not just fighting to defeat Germany. They were fighting to avenge their families and save what remained of Poland. That fury made them exceptionally dangerous enemies who terrified German soldiers unlucky enough to face them in combat. The story of Polish-American soldiers fighting with extra fury reveals how ethnic identity and personal connections to occupied nations influenced American combat effectiveness during World War II. For Polish Americans specifically, the stakes were uniquely high because Poland had suffered more completely than almost any other occupied nation. Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia had agreed to partition Poland, implementing policies designed to eliminate Polish culture, murder Polish elites, and reduce the Polish population to slave labor. Polish Americans arriving in Europe in 1944 came with knowledge of these atrocities and determination to exact revenge. This personal motivation, combined with American training and equipment, created soldiers who fought with an intensity that shocked both their allies and enemies. Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia invaded Poland simultaneously in September 1939, crushing Polish military resistance within weeks. The two totalitarian powers divided Poland between them. Nazi-occupied Western Poland became the general government, a colonial administration designed to exploit Polish resources while eliminating Polish national identity. Nazi policies in Poland were among the most brutal of the war. The Nazis viewed Poles as racially inferior Slavs fit only for slavery. Polish intellectuals, professionals, clergy, and political leaders were systematically murdered in operations designed to decapitate Polish society. Polish Jews, who constituted 10% of Poland's pre-war population, were concentrated in ghettos and then murdered in extermination camps. By 1944, over 90% of Polish Jews had been killed. Ethnic Poles were also murdered in large numbers through executions, forced labor, and starvation. Polish Americans learned of these atrocities through letters from family members, reports from refugees, and news coverage. By 1944, Polish American communities in cities like Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, and Milwaukee were consumed with anxiety about family members in occupied Poland. Many families had lost contact entirely. Others received occasional letters describing conditions of hunger, fear, and persecution. The Warsaw Uprising of August to October 1944, when Polish resistance forces attempted to liberate Warsaw only to be crushed by German forces while Soviet armies watched, was followed intensely by Polish Americans who understood that the city's destruction meant the deaths of countless relatives. Stanley Kowalski had come to America with his parents in 1921 when he was 9 years old. His family settled in Chicago, where his father found work in the stockyards. Stanley grew up speaking Polish at home and English in school. He maintained connections to Poland through letters to cousins and extended family. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Stanley followed news of the occupation with growing horror. Letters from Poland became less frequent and more guarded as Nazi censorship intensified. By 1941, Stanley had received no letters for over a year and did not know whether his relatives were alive. When America entered the war in December 1941, Stanley immediately attempted to enlist despite being 29 with a wife and 2 children. The draft board initially deferred him because of dependence and essential war work. But Stanley appealed, arguing that fighting Germany was personal for him. The appeal was granted, and Stanley was drafted in 1942. He landed in Normandy on D-Day +6 as part of the 4th Infantry Division. From the moment he set foot in France, Stanley fought with intensity that impressed and sometimes worried his superiors. The fury that Polish-American soldiers brought to combat manifested in multiple ways. They volunteered for dangerous missions that other soldiers avoided. When his platoon needed volunteers for night patrols into German-held territory, Stanley always raised his hand. When the company needed men to lead assaults on fortified positions, Polish-American soldiers were eager to go first. This aggression was tactically valuable. Commanders knew they could rely on Polish-American soldiers to press attacks and complete difficult missions. But the fury also created problems. Polish-American soldiers sometimes took excessive risks that endangered themselves and their units. They sometimes refused to take German prisoners, shooting surrendering soldiers in violation of rules of warfare. Officers had to intervene to prevent atrocities that would have resulted in courts-martial. The fury was most visible when Polish-American soldiers encountered SS units or Wehrmacht soldiers who admitted to service on the Eastern Front. Stanley and other Polish-Americans knew that SS units had conducted massacres in Poland and that Wehrmacht soldiers had participated in atrocities. When German prisoners revealed they had served in Poland, Polish-American soldiers had to be physically restrained from killing them. On several occasions, prisoners simply disappeared while in custody of Polish-American guards, and no one investigated too closely because commanders understood the depth of hatred involved. The personal knowledge that family members were suffering or dying in Poland drove Polish-American combat intensity in ways that abstract patriotism could not match. American soldiers generally fought well, motivated by unit cohesion and professional pride. But Polish-American soldiers had additional motivation rooted in blood ties and cultural identity. Every German they killed was revenge for atrocities in Poland. Every mile advanced toward Germany was a step closer to Poland's liberation. This personal dimension created psychological resilience that helped Polish-American soldiers endure extended combat. Corporal John Wisniewski from Detroit exemplified this intensity. John's parents had immigrated in 1925, and he maintained close connections to family in Warsaw. When the Warsaw Uprising began in August 1944, John learned that his uncle and cousins were fighting in the resistance. For 2 months, he followed news of the uprising while fighting in France. When Warsaw fell, and German forces systematically destroyed the city in retaliation, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians, John received confirmation that his entire Warsaw family had been killed. The news transformed him. He became reckless, volunteering for every dangerous mission and taking risks that should have killed him. His squad mates later reported that John seemed to be seeking death, trying to kill as many Germans as possible before they killed him. Miraculously, he survived the war, but the psychological damage from losing his family left scars that never healed. Never. The liberation of concentration camps in 1945 vindicated everything Polish-American soldiers had believed about Nazi atrocities and intensified their fury against remaining German resistance. When American forces liberated camps like Buchenwald and Dachau, Polish-American soldiers saw evidence of crimes that exceeded even their worst fears. The skeletal survivors, the piles of corpses, the gas chambers and crematoria, all confirmed that the Nazis had implemented systematic genocide. Polish-American soldiers who saw these camps reported that their hatred of Germans, already intense, became absolute. Stanley Kowalski entered Buchenwald concentration camp days after its liberation in April 1945. The experience broke something in him. He saw Polish political prisoners who had survived years of starvation and torture. He saw evidence of medical experiments and systematic murder. He realized that his relatives in Poland had likely suffered similar or worse fates. After Buchenwald, Stanley's combat style changed. He had been aggressive before, but now he was cold and methodical. He killed Germans efficiently and without emotion, viewing it as necessary work rather than personal vendetta. The end of the war brought complicated emotions for Polish-American soldiers. Germany's defeat was satisfying, but Poland's liberation was incomplete. Soviet forces had occupied Poland, and Stalin showed no intention of allowing genuine Polish independence. The Polish government in exile in London was excluded from power as Stalin imposed a communist government. Polish-American soldiers who had fought to liberate Poland discovered that their ancestral homeland had merely exchanged one totalitarian occupier for another. This bitter realization left many Polish-American veterans feeling their sacrifices had been partially in vain. The post-war efforts of Polish-American soldiers to reconnect with surviving family members revealed the scale of losses. Stanley Kowalski eventually learned that most of his extended family in Poland had been killed. Some had died in the initial invasion. Others had been murdered by the Nazis during the occupation. A few had survived, but were now trapped behind the Iron Curtain with limited ability to communicate with family in America. The joy of surviving the war was tempered by grief over family members who had not survived and frustration that Poland remained unfree. The legacy of Polish-American soldiers who fought with extra fury because of family in occupied Poland demonstrates how personal connections to threatened populations can motivate extraordinary combat performance. It shows how ethnic identity created soldiers with divided but complementary loyalties, simultaneously committed to America and to ancestral homelands. Polish-American soldiers fought with extra intensity because their families suffered under Nazi occupation. That fury made them dangerous, effective warriors who contributed significantly to Germany's defeat. But it also extracted psychological costs and raised questions about how personal vengeance relates to military discipline. The story of their service honors their sacrifices while acknowledging the complexity of motivations and the costs that fury, however justified, imposes on those who fight with it.